watching World Today, your window to the world. I'm Munmun Bhattacharya. On the show today, we will update you on all the developments panning out in Afghanistan, from evacuations that are continuing to US President Joe Biden's statement that US is on pace to meet a 31st of August deadline for evacuations despite previous calls from allies for an extension, and all about how India is reaching out to Indian and Afghan nationals in distress while honoring their religious sentiments and evacuating them to safety. But first up, the top stories. US President Joe Biden refuses to extend Afghanistan evacuation deadline beyond the 31st of August. While hinting at contingency plans, EU calls on the Taliban to allow free passage for people to reach the Kabul airport. World Bank halts funding to development projects in Afghanistan. Evacuations continue in full swing from Afghanistan as tens of thousands of Afghans fearing persecution continue to throng Kabul airport. Loss of jobs, rising prices and shuttered banks compound the misery of Afghans. World battles COVID-19. More than 21.41 crore people across the globe infected. Over 19.16 crore patients have recovered. The deadly virus has claimed over 44.69 lakh lives globally. United States continues to witness a spike in daily new cases. Kathy Hochul sworn in as New York's first woman governor by the state's highest judge. Pledges to strengthen the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and expedite direct aid to residents in need. Promises to change the state's political culture and work to ensure New Yorkers believe in their government again. Let's begin with the big news. With jobs gone, banks shut and food prices soaring in Afghanistan, Afghans are desperate to leave the country. And the crowds continue to swell at the Kabul airport in the hope of getting a flight out of the country. Some Afghans can be seen standing in knee-deep water and even trash. Even as the country is in the throes of economic turmoil, World Bank suspended aid to it, saying it is deeply concerned by the situation there, especially regarding women's rights after the Taliban seized power. Here's a look at all the developments in Afghanistan.
Evacuations continue in full swing in Afghanistan. These are the visuals of crowds of desperate Afghans as they continue to gather outside of Kabul's airport in the hopes of evacuation. Some standing in knee-deep water amid trash and near barbed wire, their hopes are dying down. Aid agencies have already warned of a looming humanitarian crisis for the population left behind. Although the Islamist group which marched into Kabul on August 15 has told the Afghans crowding the airport in the hope of boarding flights that they had nothing to fear and should go home. But tens of thousands of Afghans even fear persecution have thronged Kabul's airport since the Taliban takeover. The lucky ones securing seats on flights mostly arranged by Western governments that have so far evacuated more than 70,000 people, including their citizens, NATO personnel and Afghans at risk since August 14. The Taliban has already given a deadline for foreign evacuations by August 31 and asked the United States to stop urging talented Afghans to leave the country. Spanish soldiers were also seen helping Afghan refugees get into Kabul airport. Visuals on a chest cam of a Spanish soldier shows people waving red clothing to draw the attention of the Spanish military before running and seeking help to get into the airport. More than 1,100 refugees have landed in Spain since last week when the Taliban took power of Afghanistan. US military has released images and video of soldiers interacting and playing with Afghan children at the Hamid Karzai International Airport. The children are also waiting to be evacuated. A former US Army interpreter, Hamidullah Ehsan, saw what was coming. Call it fate or luck. Barely 2 weeks before the Taliban forces marched into Kabul this month, Ehsan got his mother and 2 of his siblings out of Afghanistan. They are now registered with the United Nations Refugee Agency in neighboring Tajikistan. Ehsan has one more sister who remains stuck in the now Taliban-controlled capital of Kabul with her husband and infant child. He has filled her name on an evacuation list, and while he knows it's a long shot, he's prepared to do whatever it takes.
One of my sister, she left behind out there because nobody knows that everything's happened in a second like that. And I was really trying to find a way to my sister to evacuate her too, because I know that I was known that the process of getting them here is so long. It is not like something to do it in a month, 2, 3, or 4, whatever. It takes years and years. But there's no chance. We left her back there. She's there right now. All I just want from the government or to the embassy to call her and ask her to come to the airport. I'm ready to pay her tickets back here. I'm ready to take care of her in any financial situation. But I just want her to be safe out there.
A rising number of people in Kabul are facing a daily struggle to get by with their jobs gone, banks still shuttered, and food prices soaring. As the days pass, everyday worries about food and rent are adding to the uncertainty in a country whose fragile economy has been crushed by disappearance of international support. And after all these, the World Bank has halted funding for projects in Afghanistan after the Taliban seized control of the country. It cited concerns over how the Taliban's takeover will impact the country's development prospects, especially for women. The suspension follows the Taliban's swift takeover of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, former Afghan President Hamid Karzai and peace envoy Abdullah met with Iranian and Qatari envoys. The meetings took place a week after Karzai and Abdullah met with the Taliban commander and senior leader of the Haqqani network militant group Anas Haqqani, amid efforts by the Taliban to set up a government. World Today Desk, DD India.
A virtual emergency session and committed to work together on the immediate evacuation effort in Afghanistan to ensure it continues safely. They also agreed that there must be a shared roadmap for engaging with the Taliban that aims to preserve the progress of the last 20 years. Here's more.
As the crisis in Afghanistan deepens, G7 leaders have agreed to a plan to deal with the Taliban, but with riders. Their number one condition being that the militants must allow safe passage to Afghans wanting to leave the country, even after the August 31 deadline.
What we've done today, the G7, is we've got together the leading Western powers and agreed not just a joint approach to dealing with the evacuation, but also a roadmap for the way in which we're going to engage with the Taliban, as it probably will be a Taliban government in Kabul. And the number one condition we're setting as G7 is that they've got to guarantee right the way through August the 31st and beyond safe passage for those who want to come out. Now, someone will say that they don't accept that, and some of them, I hope, will see the sense of that, because the G7 has very considerable leverage, economic, diplomatic, and political.
The leaders also agreed to a roadmap for future engagement with the Taliban.
We want to help with the humanitarian crisis, the difficulties that people in Afghanistan, people fleeing Afghanistan, are going to experience. But when it comes to engaging with the Taliban and engaging with the government in Afghanistan, whatever its exact composition, the G7 has huge leverage. And today, the G7 agreed, we brought them together, and they agreed a roadmap for future engagement with the Taliban. So that, if those huge funds are going to be unfrozen eventually for use by the government and people of Afghanistan, then what we're saying is Afghanistan can't lurch back into becoming a breeding ground of terror. Afghanistan can't become a narco state. Girls have got to be educated up to the age of 18 and so on.
President Joe Biden said on August 24 that he had told G7 leaders that the United States is on pace to complete the US pullout from Afghanistan by August 31, but that doing so will depend on cooperation from the Taliban. In a televised address after his G7 meeting, Biden said the Taliban must not disrupt US operations or access to Kabul airport for the deadline to be met.
First, on evacuation, we agreed that we will continue to close cooperation to get people out as efficiently and safely as possible. We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. But the completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who we're transporting out and no disruptions to our operations. In addition, I've asked the Pentagon and the State Department for contingency plans to adjust the timetable, should that become necessary.
After the G7 emergency summit, German Chancellor Angela Merkel announced a financial lifeline worth a total of $600 million to Afghanistan.
On behalf of Germany, I announced that we will be contributing 100 million euros of immediate aid towards humanitarian purposes, and that we will have a further 500 million at the ready. Aside from the money, it is also a question of logistics, as Afghanistan has no civilian airport at the moment. And you can imagine what this means in regards to the transportation of medicines and other similar goods. And this is another reason why it is vital that we get a civilian airport in Afghanistan as soon as possible, where aid could be transported.
Meanwhile, the European Union also called on the Taliban to allow free passage for those trying to reach Kabul airport and called on the US to secure the airport as long as necessary to allow the departure of all those entitled to evacuation.
We call on the new Afghan authorities to allow free passage to all foreign and Afghan citizens who wish to get to the airport. We have also raised this issue with our American friends and partners on two particular aspects. First, the need to secure the airport as long as necessary to complete the operations. And second, a fair and equitable access to the airport for all nationals entitled to evacuation.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told media that most European Union staff based in Afghanistan, including Afghans, had been evacuated from Kabul airport.
Most of the EU's staff, and including the Afghan staff, including their families, have been evacuated now from Afghanistan and are safe. We all agreed that it is our moral duty to help the Afghan people and to provide as much as possible support as conditions allow. The situation is indeed a tragedy for the Afghan people, and it is a major setback for the international community.
On the other hand, Afghanistan's new Taliban rulers said on Tuesday they wanted all foreign evacuations from the country completed by August 31, and they would not agree to an extension as the group of 7 leaders met to discuss the crisis. Western troops have been working frantically to get foreigners and Afghans onto planes and out of the country, and Biden has faced growing pressure from allies to negotiate more time for the airlift. World Today Desk, DD India.
Let's now take a look at the kind of evacuations that India has been carrying out from Afghanistan, the stakes that India has in Afghanistan, and the investments that it has made in Afghanistan over the past several years when there was a democracy. Well, India evacuated 626 people on 7 evacuation flights. That's the kind of evacuation that India has carried out so far. And in the latest round that occurred only yesterday, India evacuated 78 people from Kabul via Dushanbe. So India has been bringing its people as well as Afghans in distress to India via various countries. 3 copies of Sri Guru Granth Sahib, the holy scripture of the Sikhs, has been brought safely to India. It's a gesture that has touched the hearts of the Sikh community. All Afghan nationals can travel to India only on e-visa. This is a decision that has been taken, that only on e-visa will such travel be allowed. And this is the e-visa portal that India has, where Afghan nationals can go and apply for e-visas. You can note this down. If you are an Afghan national, if you know someone in Afghanistan, then you can ask them to apply for e-visa on this particular e-visa portal. The details were given early on by the Ministry of External Affairs in India. India has asked its nationals to get in touch with MEA's special Afghanistan cell. MEA has set up a special Afghanistan cell in order to help people in distress in Afghanistan, including Indian nationals who would want to return. India voices concern over human rights abuses in Afghanistan. This is a stand that India took at the UN Human Rights Council. A special session of that was held yesterday. India has called for inclusive and broad-based dispensation in Afghanistan, a dispensation where women and minorities are represented. So India says that voices of women, aspirations of children and rights of minorities must be respected in any dispensation in Afghanistan, and that the situation in Afghanistan should not pose a challenge to its neighbors in any way, where it is talking about the need to ensure that Afghanistan's soil is not used by terror groups such as Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed to harm the interests of any country. India also reached out to Afghanistan during the COVID-19 pandemic, and before that India has undertaken development projects in each of the 34 Afghan provinces. So India invested a lot in the people of Afghanistan and the overall Afghan society by ensuring a lot of investment across sectors in Afghanistan. India extended humanitarian assistance to strengthen food security during the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll bring you details of that in the next slide, because India did send 75,000 metric tons of wheat during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's about the kind of help that India has been extending over the past several years, including during the pandemic. And now our correspondent Meghna joins us with the latest. Meghna, 626 Indians and other Afghans have been evacuated by India through 7 evacuation flights so far. What's the latest that you are picking up from your sources on future evacuation flights by India?
Have been evacuated as of now. Over 200 people are Indians, and there are other Afghan nationals also who have been evacuated. So as we can see, that Operation Devi Shakti is going on in full swing, because earlier India had the strategy of actually collecting all the data, and besides that India also had the strategy of the special Afghanistan cell that had been set up, which was operating 24/7 and collecting data, has received thousands of calls and messages and emails of people who want to be evacuated from there, and not only the Indian nationals, but besides that the Afghan nationals, and especially the nationals in Afghanistan who are minorities. And that's what we had seen yesterday. Also 3 Swarups of the Guru Granth Sahib had arrived in India, and with all the rituals it was taken to West Delhi at a Gurudwara there, and it was kept there. So the Sikh community definitely was ecstatic. But while we spoke to a number of people there, they told that the situation there is still very it's not very good, and there are people who are still desperate to come, and there were many people who were actually trying since days and days to reach to the airport, and they finally made it to the airport and were able to board the military plane, and after that they were taken to Dushanbe. From there a commercial civilian flight brought them to New Delhi. So the situation there still is not very good, and while we see that around the airport even tear gas it was being used to disperse the crowd. So definitely that proves the point that how the situation is still there. People are clutching on to their papers, and they want to at least get inside the airport at any cost. Many of them don't even have documents, but are just trying their luck to get inside the airport and leave that place. Besides that, when we also got to know from people that there were several people from Afghanistan who had come to India from Kabul. People had come to India last year as well, after the blast at the Har Rai Sahib Gurudwara in Kabul that took place in March 2020. So after that, people had come, and because India had sent special flights during the lockdown at that point of time, and these people were saying that they still have their friends and relatives there, and they are trying to come back. And while India is sending flights, they are actually very hopeful that these people will also be repatriated as soon as possible. And while our sources also tell us that there are flights expected past midnight, post midnight, that will be arriving with quite a substantial number of people on board.
Right, Meghna, also a key decision has been taken by the government of India, which is that now Afghan nationals can travel to India only on e-visas. Why was that decision taken?
Basically, because of the internal displacement of people from one place to the other, maybe there are a number of people whose passports have been misplaced. People do not have their documents, because we have been seeing that, people have just been running around, without their luggages. Many of the people who I also met at the T3 or who I met at the Hindon Air Force Station didn't have much luggage with them, because they hardly had time to actually think about carrying any luggage for that matter. And many of the people have been displaced, houses have been burned down. So probably, this might have just been the case of the passports being misplaced. So the government of India has said that they can apply for an emergency visa. There on the portal that has been given, on that portal they can apply for a visa and they can come to India. The visa holders who are already there in Afghanistan, the visa stands cancelled, but the people who already have a visa and are here in India, their visa is not cancelled. Only people who now want to come, hereafter want to come to India and do have a visa, their visa is actually cancelled, and they have to apply for an emergency visa if they want to come to India. So this process has been put up so that the seamless issue of the issuing of a visa can take place, and also we'll have the numbers of people that are have been applying, because we have been seeing since the past few days, and it's about a week now that several requests have been coming in. Thousands of mails and thousands of WhatsApp messages and calls have been coming at the special Afghanistan cell, not only by Indian nationals but also Afghan nationals, and especially who are minorities and who want to come to India.
Right, Meghna, thank you for those updates. And now let's get some analysis on the evolving situation in Afghanistan. Joining us are Anil Wadhwa, former Secretary MEA, and Sushant Sareen, Strategic Affairs expert. I welcome you both to World Today. I'll come to you, Ambassador Wadhwa, first. Reports have emerged from Afghanistan that the Taliban no longer want Afghans to leave the country, and they are setting up several hurdles in their way and also the way of the troops that are present there and would want to move out of the country. The EU has sought more time from the Taliban for safe passage beyond the 31st of August. The Taliban is unmoved on that. Where do you think this is headed?
So I think the Taliban has made it quite clear that they would prefer that the Afghans who are in Afghanistan do not go out of the country. And they've also said that they would not be in favor of extending the deadline for evacuation, because they say that that was something that was agreed upon with the United States in the negotiations. Having said that, I think there would be a lot of pressure as the deadline nears from a number of countries who would like to take out those who are working with them, or their sympathizers, or would help them in certain ways in Afghanistan to get those people out of the country. And as we near the deadline, I suppose there would be some amount of flexibility which might come in on not only on the Taliban side, but I think also on the part of the other countries who are engaged in these evacuations. And that has to happen, because otherwise it would be quite a disaster for both sides, I would say. And I think if the Afghan government does not take care of its own affairs very quickly, then we're also heading into a humanitarian crisis, a social crisis, and above all an economic crisis, because their accounts have been frozen and trade has virtually stopped.
Right.
The outside world is suffering as well.
Sushant Sareen, what to your mind are the security implications for the region of the developments in Afghanistan? China has indicated that they'll be providing financial help to Afghanistan under Taliban rule, and besides that, we've also heard from a Pakistani leader belonging to Imran Khan's party that they've been assured by the Taliban that Pakistan will be helped in Kashmir.
Frankly, I welcome the self-goal that the Pakistanis keep scoring, so that's all right. But I'd love to see the Chinese put in the money. Until now, we haven't seen them put in any money anywhere. They've always put in money and taken more than their pound of flesh. So let's see them put in the kind of money which the West was putting in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, or almost $4 to $5 billion to run the Afghan government, the Afghan state. And they were really getting nothing for that in return. There was no contracts being signed. There were no, mining leases being given, nothing of the sort. This was a pure grant that was being given, including by some of the multilateral institutions like the World Bank and others. So let's see the Chinese match it up. And frankly, among all the countries which currently are very jubilant about the Taliban coming to power, the Chinese are, of course, in the front lines of that. But they are the only ones who have some money. I don't think the Pakistanis have any money, or even, for that matter, any wheat to send to Afghans, or any foodstuffs to send to Afghanistan, because if you look at the Pakistan economy, they've been importing food for themselves. So how the hell are they going to send anything to these fellows? The Russians don't have the kind of money which is required to run the Afghan government and the Afghan state. With all the NGOs and everybody else pulling out, that means there will be a lot of unemployment of educated people. And it's very rich for the Taliban to say that we don't want these guys to leave. But when you start targeting people because of their ideology, because of whatever professions they were following, and they've actually been assassinating people in the past, there is no sense of security anybody has, no sense of a job security also. Forget about life, even their jobs are not secure. So I don't think anybody is wanting to stay in a horror show which the Taliban are promising. And most people are going to leave. The only thing is that the deadline, I think the Americans have already accepted the deadline.
Yes.
The Taliban have been, switching their positions, because yesterday they said that we don't want anybody to leave and we are going to stop Afghans from approaching the airport.
Yes.
But today, the statements from their side is that, after August 31, once the commercial flights start, any Afghans who have visas or who have the documents and who want to go to other countries, we will not put any bar in their path. So let's see how this unfolds. But frankly, I don't have any degree of optimism on what these characters are going to do.
Right. Ambassador Adva, the Taliban have been anything but inclusive in the past, and even now there have been summary executions of civilians and the surrendered security forces, as was said by the UN HRC chief yesterday. Is there any difference between Taliban 1.0 and Taliban 2.0 to your mind?
No, it does not seem as if there is much of a difference, except that this time the rhetoric is there, which is different, and that's possibly because the current lot of the Taliban want to gain acceptability in order to make sure that they are allowed to establish diplomatic contacts with the outside world. And I suppose at the moment, the whole world, barring Pakistan, China, perhaps Turkey, maybe Russia, a handful of countries are actually waiting and watching as to how the Taliban would behave in this version, and whether this would become an inclusive government or it will be concentration again of the Taliban core group, many of whom have been arrested in the past, incarcerated for various crimes, etc. How they behave as far as women and children rights are concerned, and generally human rights are concerned, and what are their policies with regard to education for girls, for instance. So all this will be watched very carefully, but so far, other than the rhetoric, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference.
Right. So Jhonson, while there are security challenges in the region, but would you also say that the world has also got this message over the past several years that India is not a country that you can mess with? India has shown in the past that it can take retaliatory action, and the security situation in the country, including in J&K, is much better than what it used to be in the 1990s when the Taliban was in power in Afghanistan.
That's true. I don't think the security situation in India, or especially in Jammu and Kashmir, can be compared even remotely to what it was in the 90s. There's been a sea change in that. but I think we cannot also afford to be complacent. We cannot, afford to relax. I think we should brace ourselves for a new wave of terrorism, because even though the security situation has vastly improved, at some levels it does remain precarious, and it doesn't take much to actually spoil the situation out there. So I think we need to be careful on that. Number one. Number two, it's I think extremely important that we are not in a defensive mode, but we are also in an offensive mode. Something which this government has displayed over the last couple of years, at least on 2 occasions. Also in case of what was happening along the LOC until recently. So I think the offensive mode is just as important. And then, to be able to diplomatically play the brinkmanship, because normally for 35 years, we've had this policy of turning the other cheek. So the world has come to accept that, look, you can keep slapping the Indians, they'll keep turning the other cheek. And I think it is very important to disabuse the world that that's not going to happen anymore. And that, we are going to be able to play this game of brinkmanship and then follow through on our threats. Because just, making threats which you don't intend to follow through with, actually compromises the position which you're trying to take. Having said that, I just want to come back to something which you were asking, Ambassador Wadhwa. See, the thing is, he's right that what has changed is the kind of optics which the Taliban represent to the rest of the world. And I think they're pretty smart in doing that, because I think they've gamed, the West and the kind of vacuity that exists in much of the West, where because they have these kind of certain stereotypes, it's very easy to play them. So, for example, if you say the right words, if you say the right phrases, it suddenly finds resonance among these characters because they haven't read anything, they have no feel for the place. It's like terrorists wearing a 3-piece suit and still spouting terrorism, I think would be very acceptable to many Western audiences because they think it's people like us. Listen, and I don't mean this only for the Western people. I think in India also, we have these similar stereotypes which is why we get Pakistan wrong so often. So I'll give you one. You will hear any number of people in this country say, oh, I met that general and he loves his whiskey, so he must be a nice guy. Listen, yaar, he must be loving his whiskey. He would still be an Islamist and he would still want to export terrorism into India and kill you the moment he has a chance. But because we have these stereotypes that because he drinks whiskey, he must be a liberal man, which means he must be open to good relations with India. That's not how it works. So we have our stereotypes according to which we mistake what happens across the border. The West has its own stereotypes. And I think the Taliban have been very smart in playing that out.
Well, that's an interesting point. Ambassador Wadhwa, do you agree with Sushant Sarin's viewpoint on this? Also, will it be in Taliban's interest to have a broad-based dispensation, because perhaps that would help them gain some legitimacy?
Yes, to your first question, I certainly agree. I think we have these stereotypes, and unless you have a good understanding of the situation and what the Taliban are up to, what their policies have been in the past, you have a sense of history. It's very difficult to judge on face value from what is being said. As I said, it's completely, rhetoric and optics, which at the moment the Taliban is laying stress on. But going forward, how they act on it is going to be the litmus test. And to your second question, I do certainly, I feel that, as far as the Taliban is concerned, they will look for some amount of inclusivity, just again, in order to provide some optics to the outside world, that they are being flexible, but of course it remains to be seen what kind of inclusion that is, and whether they are only including people who are within the Taliban fold, which are on the fringes, for instance, whom they can control, whether they will include only those who are recommended by people like countries like Pakistan, for instance, and not take into account the others. There are hardly any others who are actually left in Afghanistan to include. And if you have a semblance of legitimacy to the so-called inclusive government in Taliban, then again we will see a number of countries, especially in the West, jumping on the bandwagon and saying, look, they've been accommodative and let us give them a chance. And that is the whole game here, to look to appear to be inclusive, to look to appear to be much more liberal than they are at the moment. And I don't think the world should be fooled by that. They have to judge them by their actions and to read between the lines and to see what they actually mean.
Sushant Sareen, the National Resistance Front fighters are putting up a strong fight against the Taliban in the Panjshir Valley. Is this a phenomenon that is likely to be limited to the Panjshir Valley, or do you think that warlords elsewhere in Afghanistan could also take a cue from this?
I don't think I would call them warlords. I would probably call them people who have an interest in the system, who need to fight for survival. But look, the National Resistance Front in the Panjshir is just a start. Now, whether this takes off, whether they're able to hold out for how long, how much support they get from the rest of the world, because as of now, there isn't much support coming their way. Part of the reason is that the evacuations haven't taken place till now, and they are still continuing. And perhaps you could see some countries step up to help these guys, but we don't know that. So how are they going to supply themselves? How are they going to equip themselves? All of those factors are going to be extremely critical going forward, because in the past, when the Panjshir Valley resisted, they always had some external support coming their way. Their lines of communication and their supply lines were open at one point of time through Pakistan and later on through Central Asia. Today, that's not the case. So we'll have to see how long they can hold on, or whether there's some kind of a deal. But if this phenomena takes hold, and as if for example the economic difficulties or the economic meltdown starts actually biting, if the Taliban true to their form start doing things in Afghanistan which leads to a resistance, so there are just too many imponderables on how things are likely to pan out. But all of those imponderables could lead to resistance rising against the Taliban, which would then lead you to a situation where there would be people who will start fighting against them, who will resist them. And once that kind of a thing happens, many of the countries which are probably in a wait and watch mode, including in the neighborhood, and do not want to take any active steps against the Taliban or giving any kind of refuge to anti-Taliban forces, might not remain in the same mode going forward. So I think we just have to wait and see how these things unfold. Frankly, I am a great fan of Mr. Amrullah Saleh, and I think he has been one of the most consistent politicians in Afghanistan. He is one person who has actually called a spade and got it right every time. So unfortunately, he's the last man standing at this point in time, along with the late Ahmed Shah Massoud's son. But out there also, there are some doubts whether Mr. Massoud's son is likely to hold on or inclined to doing a deal. But again, like I said, everything is in the realm of speculation. There's a lot of misinformation also going around.
True.
So we'll have to just wait and see how the situation out there unfolds.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sushant Sareen and Ambassador Wadhwa, for having joined us. Moving on, India's Chief of Defence Staff General Bipin Rawat has said that India is committed to ensure that we have a terrorist-free environment. As far as Afghanistan is concerned, we will make sure that any activity which is likely to flow out of Afghanistan and then find its way into India will be dealt with in the manner in which we are dealing with terrorism in the country. Speaking at an interactive session with US Commander of Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral John Aquilino, on India-US partnership securing the 21st century in New Delhi, General Rawat said that if any support is forthcoming from the Quad countries in identifying terrorists or by way of intelligence to fight the war on terror, that would be welcome.
Nation is committed to ensure that we have a terrorist-free environment in this region. So as far as Afghanistan is concerned, we will make sure that any activity which is likely to flow out of Afghanistan and then find its way into India will be dealt with in the manner in which we are dealing with terrorism in our country. And I think if any other support can be forthcoming from the Quad nations in at least identifying the terrorists and getting some intelligence input to fight this global war on terrorism, I think that would be welcome.
India's Chief of Defence Staff also said that the unprecedented growth of the Chinese PLA and Navy is a threat, and the Indian government is building its capabilities accordingly.
Yeah, we are seeing the Navy expanding exponentially. I think today it is possibly the largest expanding Navy in the world. And we surely see the threat also emerging in the Indian Ocean region. So therefore, we have to also counter this threat by ensuring that we also develop our naval armada accordingly, ensure that we are able to take control of at least the Indian Ocean region and the Indo-Pacific, along with the other strategic partnership that we are evolving. So that is very important for us, and I think that is being given the right impetus by our government.
The visiting commander of the Indo-Pacific Command of USA held talks with the CDS, General Bipin Rawat. He also spoke at the Observer Research Foundation on the topic strategic partnership with India in the 21st century. Admiral John Aquilino said that the US is committed to evacuating all its citizens from Afghanistan by the end of the month, that is by 31st August, and is constantly cooperating with India in the process.
The United States is committed to ensure we get all of our citizens out and the citizens of our partner. There's been close coordination between India and between Central Command to ensure that our citizens are safe and extracted.
He also said that India is a critical partner in USA's Indo-Pacific strategy, as India shares the same values of freedom of navigation and rules-based order in international waters. He stressed on the need to operate together with like-minded nations in the Indo-Pacific and cited the Malabar naval drills in that context. The Quad navies, including the Indian Navy, will be holding naval exercises off Guam this week.
The continuous deterrence to ensure open sea lanes, rules-based international order. My team executes that every day, and our partnership with India is critical because we are like-minded nations. We have common values, that for rules-based international order, that for all nations with an equal voice to settle disputes peacefully.
Let's now take a look at updates on COVID-19 from across the world. So far, more than 21.41 crore people from across the globe have been infected by COVID-19. Meanwhile, over 19.16 crore patients have recovered from the virus till date. The deadly virus has claimed lives of 44.69 lakh people across the world. The United States continues to witness a spike in the daily new cases of COVID-19, and so far 3.89 crore people have been infected by COVID in the country, while 6.48 lakh people have died in the country due to the virus. With the resurgence of COVID-19 cases in the United States, the nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, on Tuesday said that the US could get the pandemic under control by early next year if vaccinations ramp up. Fauci said full FDA approval for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine paves the way for more people to get inoculated, with potential approval for Moderna's vaccine in the coming weeks and authorization for younger children by autumn. The US health officials have noted that the number of inoculations have risen in recent weeks, and they hope Monday's FDA action spurs more people to get their first shots.
I would like to appeal to this country, to the people in the country who are not vaccinated, to realize that we have the capability among ourselves to essentially cut down the time frame to getting the end of this pandemic very, very clearly. Get vaccinated and the time frame will be truncated dramatically.
In Australia, COVID-19 cases in Sydney rose to a new daily record today. Officials urged an increase in vaccinations to help curb the rate of hospitalizations that is putting severe strain on the health system. Despite 2 months of lockdowns, New South Wales state reported 990 new cases, taking Australia's daily case numbers to a new high of just below 1,000. Australia, grappling to control a third wave of the coronavirus, has locked down more than half of its 25 million population, including its largest cities, Sydney and Melbourne, and is accelerating an initially sluggish vaccine rollout. Time now to get you some more global updates.
In Colombia, a methane gas explosion at a coal mine in central region left at least a dozen people dead on Tuesday. The miners were killed after the underground shaft they were working in exploded as a result of a methane gas buildup. The mine was located in the Topaga municipality in central Bojaca department. Rescuers are now working to retrieve the bodies, but the collapse at the mine shaft is complicating efforts. In 2020, 171 people were killed in mining accidents in Colombia. New York's first female governor, Kathy Hochul, was on Tuesday sworn into office by the state's highest judge. She promised to change the state's political culture and work to ensure New Yorkers believe in their government again. Hochul takes over the governor's office in the wake of a sexual harassment scandal that drove her predecessor, Andrew Cuomo, from power. She promised that changing the culture of Albany would be a top priority. Hochul pledged to strengthen the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and speed direct aid to residents in need. Algeria on Tuesday cut diplomatic relations with Morocco, citing hostile actions by its most populous neighbor. Algeria's foreign minister Ramadane Lamamra accused Morocco of using Pegasus spyware against its officials, supporting a separatist group and failing in bilateral commitments. While the border between the two North African powers had been closed since 1994, they have had diplomatic relations since 1998 when they were restored following an earlier dispute. Morocco has said for years it wants the border to reopen. Algeria has said it must stay shut for security reasons. Zambia's new president Hakainde Hichilema on Tuesday pledged to tackle the country's unsustainable debt. Speaking at his swearing-in as the Southern African country's 7th president, Hichilema lamented that the national budget was overwhelmed by the cost of servicing it. Of Zambia's $12 billion external debt, around $3 billion is in Eurobonds, $3.5 billion is bilateral debt, $2.1 billion is owed to multilateral lending agencies. The new leader, who lost 5 previous presidency attempts, must now revive an economy weighed down by debt, unpredictable world commodity prices and COVID-19. Zambia became Africa's first pandemic-era sovereign default in November. World Today Desk, DD India.
And now those developments that make news but not headlines in Beyond Headlines. Water pollution has always been a matter of concern for ecologists. To tackle the menace, Mexican scientists have developed a unique nanobubble system using solar energy to improve the water quality in the capital's Xochimilco ecological zone, which is a popular tourist attraction. The team of researchers from the Center for Research and Advanced Studies have developed a method that converts solar energy into photovoltaic energy, activating a pump that sends nanobubbles into the water. The bubbles help oxygenate the water, eliminating harmful pollutants and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Environmentalists have called for action after more than 20 tons of dead fish washed up on the shores of one of Europe's largest saltwater lagoons in Spain. Campaigners warned the damage to the Mar Menor lagoon in Murcia may be irreversible. Once a magnet for tourism and a sanctuary for marine life, the lagoon on Spain's southeastern Mediterranean coast has seen fish stocks plummet in recent years, with similar mass die-offs occurring in 2016 and 2019. High levels of phosphates and nitrates in the water cause huge blooms of algae to flourish. These block out sunlight from penetrating the water and reduce oxygen levels, eventually suffocating marine life. Media exposure might have invited criticism for this Russian homosexual couple, making them to flee the country, but the couple believes that it is the same exposure that led to increase in awareness for many other members of the LGBTQ community. 49-year-old psychologist and matriarch Yoma is living with her 2 adult dreadlocked daughters, Mila and Alina, and an 8-year-old granddaughter in a flat outside Barcelona. The family featured in a promotional article on the website of upmarket food retailer Kuswil, in which they talked about how they liked shopping for fair trade goods and hummus. Greek museums and archaeological sites were opened late in Greece for the public to enjoy August's full Sturgeon moon. August's full moon, which cast its orange glow over the marble columns of the Temple of Poseidon in Cape Union, first appeared on Saturday and reached peak illumination on Sunday, according to NASA. Various cultural events were organized around the country as part of the annual festival in honor of the August full moon, with archaeological sites and museums remaining open late into the evening. A piano concert was held on the terrace of the Acropolis Museum beneath the ancient hill, with a view to the illuminated Parthenon temple. An Indian banker living in western Pune is visited by more than 3 dozen winged friends every day. About 35 to 40 Indian ring-necked and Alexandrine parakeet flock to Radhika Sonavane's balcony and hang on the feeder trays, and some special ones who like to be hand-fed perch on the window grills of her kitchen. Sonavane said the birds bring her joy as she patiently waits for their arrival both in the morning and evening. The spectacularly green with a tinge of red-colored Indian ring-necked parakeet is also known as talking birds, as they can imitate the human voice. Adelaide-based theatre performer Joanne Hearthstone was better prepared than many for lockdown delays. Hearthstone was quick to understand the opportunity the pandemic presented to reach a wider audience. The artist is now resorting to digital theatre, which means theatre for a live audience both in the room and also online, watching from home or wherever they may be in the world. Post-March 2020, Hearthstone Kidney Productions, the company she runs with her partner Tom Kidney, expanded to not just produce theatre but shows that work as digital productions too. In Korea, the emergence of a digital wholesale textile market is saving many from trouble. The big data technology allows users to find the right product among more than 1.4 million kinds of fabrics. Digital technology is also being used in apparel distribution. When a consumer views a certain outfit on the internet, artificial intelligence finds products of similar fabrics and designs right away and recommends them to the user. When an outfit is viewed through a camera lens, artificial intelligence can automatically recognize not just the type of outfit but also the precise location of buttons. So far, the program has learned some 25 million images of clothing. Xiao Kui-ji, the giant panda at Washington DC's National Zoo, has turned 1. The zoo celebrated the milestone with a fruit-sickle cake that Xiao Kui-ji shared with his mother, Mei Xiang. Mei Xiang's last cub, Bei Bei, left for China in 2019 as part of a breeding program that is key to efforts to reintroduce pandas into the wild. World Today Desk, DD India. And let's now take a look at some of the major events which occurred on this day in history.
In 1936, on this day, 16 opponents of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin were executed after a show trial. In 1944, on this day, Paris was liberated when the local German commander surrendered to the Allies. The Turin shroud, venerated by many as the burial cloth of Christ, went on public display for the first time in 45 years on this day in 1978. In 1997, on this day, Egon Krenz, East Germany's last hardline communist leader, was sentenced to 6.5 years in jail for the deaths of citizens killed while fleeing over the Berlin Wall. On this day in the year 2000, Hitachi released world's first video equipment to use digital versatile disc technology. Twin car bombs in India's financial capital Mumbai killed 51 people and injured at least 150 on this day in 2003. On this day in 2004, South African police arrested Mark Thatcher, the son of Margaret Thatcher, on suspicion of involvement in a coup plot in Equatorial Guinea. Thatcher later pleaded guilty and avoided jail in a deal with prosecutors. Former Ukraine Prime Minister Pavlo Lazarenko sentenced to 9 years in prison and fined $10 million in a US court after being convicted in 2004 of extortion and money laundering. On this day in the year 2007, former French Prime Minister Raymond Barre, an economist who helped set Europe on its road to a single currency, died at the age of 83. In 2017, on this day, Hurricane Harvey made landfall in Texas. World Today Desk, DD India.
And on that, we come to the close of this edition of World Today. Thanks for watching.